odd hour for us here in California. It's 9 a.m. on Monday, so I'm not sure if our audience is going to be here.
Oh, apologies. Well, we can do it another time. If we get any traction, we can always do it another time if you like.
Yeah,
Or will
absolutely.
you're just going to record and just keep playing?
Yep, and I'll
Okay,
just we can get some snippets together and share some of the most informative parts, which I'm very excited for.
great.
Yeah. All right. So as people trickle in, thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm Ruby from Real Dog Box, joined by Dr. Nick Thompson. You guys probably know him from the Holistic Vet UK. Many posts shared from Real Dog Box and the Feed Real movement. And I've been following you for a long time. Love your Patreon, Raw Pet Medics. You guys, when we can join your live, I absolutely love to. So thank you so much for joining us.
That's an absolute pleasure, Ruby. You're doing some really great work. We're up there on the barricades, and it's great to be there with you. And thank you for supporting the Raw Pet Medics on Patreon. We really appreciate that. If people don't know about Raw Pet Medics, it's my good friend Connor Brady and my good friend Dr. Brendan Clark and I get together at 7 p.m. UK time on a Tuesday on Facebook, and we talk about food, and we talk about health, and we talk about what we where we've been on holiday and what's happened recently and what are the most important things. It's always got a little bit of a dog slant, and it's always got definitely has a nutrition slant, and where we can, we talk about raw food and the benefits thereof, and hence the Raw Pet Medics. And yeah, people seem to like it. I've just come back from a festival just now, and there were so many people coming up and going, I love you guys, you're just so funny, and you're doing this, and I learned so much every week. So it's great. We really enjoy doing it. We wouldn't do it if we didn't enjoy it.
Right.
And so, yeah, we really enjoy it. And to get the feedback like that, Ruby, from you guys, because you know what you're talking about. So to hear from you that you enjoy it and that you might get something from that is a real kick for us. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say having these discussions is also a learning opportunity for you.
Mm.
I'd assume just
Mm.
sort of talking it out, and there's always new information coming around. For everyone joining us today, we're going to be talking about raw food, of course. And I loved your very catchy title of 20 Reasons Not to Feed Kibble.
And yeah, that's the light version. The full fat version is 27 and growing. So I just thought I'd go easy on you, because over there with you on the West Coast, it's 9 a.m. Ruby.
It is.
Oh wow, that's really hardcore on a 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. My goodness me! So if anybody's joining us at 9 a.m. Monday morning, salute you. It's great that you're here, and hope we can entertain and delight you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, surely we'll get a lot of questions trickling in here. We're hoping to chat for about 30 minutes and take on a Q&A.
Hmm.
So if you guys comment any questions you have, we will be addressing those in the second half of our live. But before we get started and jump right in, I'm curious about your raw journey. I mean, you've been practicing for 25 years?
I've been practicing for 30 years. I qualified from the Royal Dick School of Veterinary Studies, which is not rude. It is because it was founded by William Dick in like 1862 or something like this, and it's the Edinburgh University Vet School, and so I qualified from there with 2 degrees in 1992, and so 2022. I can't believe it. It's gone like wildfire. I've actually been a vet longer than I haven't been a vet. How about that? How crazy is that? And I've been doing raw food. I first came across raw food because I was doing homeopathy, and one of the guys in the homeopathy course was going over to Australia to do some teaching, and he came back with this funny white book by a funny guy called Ian Billinghurst, called the Bath Diet, which I thought was a funny name. And I looked at it and I just thought, oh, another fad. But within homeopathy, there's an amazing thing called removing obstacles to cure. Yeah, it's sometimes you don't need to actually introduce anything to the process, medicine or poultices or whatever it might be. You just need to remove a blockage, get that child out of the damp cottage
Mhm.
cottage and their pneumonia will improve because you've just removed that thing. Or you take the splinter out of your arm and then it will stop pouring pus and horribleness. Yeah, so sometimes it's removing obstacle to cure, and this really resonated with me because I thought, oh my goodness me, we are feeding ultra processed food
Mhm.
to our dogs and expecting to get the very best of health from our dogs. And I just thought, that is a mismatch. That's it. Just it's there's a breakdown in the
Mhm.
logic there, which is difficult to get your head around because in college it's kibble, 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 kibble and cans is the only conversation in town. When they talk about kidney disease, they'll talk about renal diets. When they talk about liver disease, they talk about liver diets. Then when they talk about joints, they talk about joint diets. That's it. That's the only conversation. And so to break the mold so early in my career was very, very difficult, and it took years to think myself out of that box. It really, really did. Vets are supposed to be pretty bright people, but we're trained. It's like the army. You're trained to think this way, to think of medicines, to think of processed foods, to think of
Mhm.
surgery. Okay, it's very ingrained, and it's difficult to get out. And I think that's perhaps why many vets find it very difficult to get their heads around fresh and raw food feeding. I think that's at the heart of it. A lot of people ask me, "Why is my vet so anti?" I say, "Listen, give them some space." It's because they're a bit scared of it because they haven't been trained in it, and they haven't got the time in many cases to look outside the box. So I think that the veterinary profession will come gradually to either an equilibrium with raw and fresh food feeding, or maybe even better. Maybe it will become, the norm. That 60% of vets will say, "Yeah, great, let's go fresh, let's go raw." I hope so. I hope that will be the norm in the future.
Yeah,
So,
I do.
but
I hope so too. I think I've found that most of the pro raw vets are
mhm.
not in the US. There are a handful of very good
There are,
ones who are
yeah,
vocal, who are not just proponents, but who are talking about it, helping people learn about it. But I found
mm,
that in the UK, Canada, Australia, all of the English speaking countries outside of America, pretty much.
yeah, yeah,
And surely it's just a process of unlearning and relearning and finding
hmm,
reputable resources that they can reference so
hmm,
that their
hmm.
clients feel comfortable in that.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important that we maintain a positive message. Now, the conversation we're going to have today is going to be looking at kibble, and we're looking at reasons why not to feed kibble, which is potentially a negative approach to forwarding the case. But I think that the way I look at it is, if there's a bully in the schoolyard, you can just be really good and really um, turn the other cheek and be the good person in the schoolyard. But sooner or later, I think you've got to say, "Hey guys, there's a bully in the schoolyard. This is intolerable. We need to do something about this and get them over on our side, or find out why they have these problems, why they are a bully, and let's progress with them to make them not a bully so that we don't have to suffer that bully." So I'd like to think that this is a constructive conversation by highlighting some of the weaknesses in the arguments for kibble, because nobody talks about the negative sides of kibble. And I think we need to talk about those, because any type of feeding has strengths and weaknesses. And I think we need to get all of those things on the table in order to have an adult and scientific conversation. And then people can choose. Once they know what the truth of the matter, then they can choose. And I think you had Connor on a couple of weeks ago. Connor, one of the raw pet medics, he's done a wonderful book. It's called Feeding Dogs.
Mhm.
And he doesn't pay me to mention these things. I should get commission. I should really get commission, but I don't. I do it because it's a great book. Basically, he looks at the pros and the cons of raw, and he looks at the pros and cons of feeding dried, ultra processed food, and he looks at them side by side, and he comes to the conclusion that feeding raw or fresh food beats kibble hands down in every sphere, and that's really, really good. So today we might get through some of the arguments and maybe a few that he hasn't mentioned in the book as to why we should think beyond kibble. I'm looking for a good title. I'm doing this webinar. Yeah, I'm trying to make this webinar, and I'm looking for a good title. So if anybody's got a good title of how to criticize constructively kibble, that'd be good. Maybe beyond kibble. Maybe that's
Yeah,
it. Maybe I've just said it.
absolutely.
Perhaps
No, we'll put our team on it. I think
that'd be
we're pretty
great.
good at figuring that out. It looks like we've got a lot of comments so far and some questions. So just give you a heads up on our timeline here. We're hoping to chat for about 30 minutes or so and bring your questions on. A few in here. Oh, hello, Rodney. Rodney Habib is in here.
The great man himself, Sir
Yeah.
Rodney of Habibshire. Yes, great that you're here, Rodney. Thank you for coming.
Yes. Perfect. All right. Well, should we start at number 1?
Yeah.
The first 5 reasons?
Oh, the first 5 reasons. Okay, yeah. Let me go. I'm going to go over there like if I go like that. Can you still see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I can't see you. So if
Oh,
you
are you
need
sharing your
to
screen?
sorry?
I can't see your screen if you are sharing something.
No, I'm not sharing my screen. I'm
Okay.
just because it's work in progress. It's
Yes.
every time I go to write something down, 3 other thoughts come into my head. So the way I start this presentation, which will be out in a few weeks, give me some time, it will be there, is I did a post a long time ago on my Instagram, and I put kibble, KIBBLE, and I've put that down to kills, inflames, bores, dogs and
Mm-hmm.
cats, burps and farts, less pick upable poos, and expensive ultra processed pellets. Okay,
Mm.
KIBBLE, kills, inflames, bores, burps and farts, less pick upable poos, expensive ultra processed pellets. So if you like, that's kind of that's the a top 6 hooks to hang our thoughts on. But if
Yeah.
we want to go a little bit further, let's just have a look. So one of the first things, and I think perhaps one of the really most profound elements of kibble, is that in the UK, there's a February 2018 paper by Alex German where he says that 74% of dogs in the UK are either overweight or obese. And that correlates, and it has been rising during the period where kibble feeding has been rising. Correlation is not causation, but there is a strong
Sure.
correlation there. And I think it's very difficult to defend the amount of obesity that we have in the in Europe and in the United States, because obesity is associated with shorter lifespans, poorer quality of life. There are many comorbidities like there's associated with liver disease and kidney disease and joint disease and cognitive decline and respiratory disease because of obesity. And so in a funny way, we vets are fighting all these diseases, and yet we've got this overweight, obese
Mm-hmm.
population. And I think that more work needs to be done to rule in or rule out kibble as a problem. I think kibble is a major part of the problem, and I'll give you a very brief reasoning why I think that is that Kibbles are made with high carbohydrate. It's usually corn or maize, or it's wheat, barley, or tapioca, or something like this. These are complex carbohydrates, which are then, when they're broken down in the gut, they will break down to sugar. Sugar increases insulin, and when your
Hmm.
insulin is high, your body goes into kind of it. We're just going into winter, and we need to put on as much weight as possible to get us through winter, because in the old days winter was a killer because you run out of food. So your body wants to put on as much fat as possible. So there's good metabolic pathways as to why high carb diets are correlated with increasing weight. We know this in the human population. Everybody, when I was at school, we were told fat makes you fat. But now we know that high carbohydrate diets are very much correlated with putting on weight because of this insulin effect. The same thing happened. You're too young for this, but in the 70s, in 1977, the American the authorities said, okay, fat makes you fat, therefore everybody needs to eat low fat food. And so what all the
Hmm.
manufacturers did is they reduced the fat. Low fat food became a thing. And what they did in order to make the food, so yogurts or bread or whatever it might, in order to make those foods still taste okay, they increased the sugar level. And when you
Hmm.
look at a graph of obesity in Europe, or primarily in the States, they, from that point, 1977, there is a distinct change in the graph. It'd been going along like this. Obesity was at a pretty steady level. That as soon as low fat food came along, which is high carbohydrate food, you see obesity climbing, climbing, climbing. And if you overlay diabetes in the States, for example, and Europe is no better, you'll see diabetes climbing like this, and you'll see heart disease climbing like this, and you'll see strokes climbing like this within the human population. And you know what? I think we're doing exactly the same with our poor dogs. We haven't learnt from what we are doing to ourselves, but we are putting it onto our dogs with low fat foods and a high carb. Even regular kibble by definition is high
Sure.
carbohydrate, and
Sure.
it's just a crazy thing to do to a facultative carnivore.
Yeah. Do you think that we have a misunderstanding of what an obese dog looks like?
Yeah, we do, because yeah, I'm just trying to think. When you live in a world where everybody is uh, pink with red spots becomes the norm.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you see what I mean? And we live in a very obesogenic environment where there's loads of junk food everywhere. As humans, loads of junk food, and we know that the human population, we're all getting bigger. And when everybody gets bigger together, the norm, the societal, psychologically, the norm
Hmm.
changes. And I think we've done exactly that with dogs. Back in the 50s, you look at pictures of a beach in the 50s, everybody's skinny as anything. And the same, if you look at dogs from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they tend to be really quite trim. But
Hmm.
in 1956, Ralston Purina came out with the kibble. They had a cereal in the States called Chex. I think they still have Chex. Still have Chex,
They do.
Chex.
They do.
Okay, see, they've learned nothing. Absolutely, we've learned nothing. But and they found that they could add meat meal to this process and produce kibble. Okay, and it was light and it was easy and it didn't attract flies and what have you. And it's like, oh my god, this is great. We've got a we can resell food, and off they went. And I think ever since then we've seen an increase in overweight and obese dogs and a correlation in the disease processes that we see with our dogs.
Absolutely. I know you're going to continue on your list here, but I want to visit the E in kibble, of it
Yep.
being expensive. I think
Okay.
there's a fear of moving towards a more fresh food diet because
Yeah.
I can't afford to feed raw. My dog already is spoiled by all these other things.
Yeah.
How do you address that thought?
I think it's brilliant. You know what? As I say, I've just come back from Dogstaval. I did 4 talks for those guys at Dogstaval, and one of the questions that was really quite prominent among people was, "Oh, it's going to be expensive." And so there are a number of ways to approach that. The first thing to say is that there is a range of prices of price points for kibble. Yeah, you can go from the really super cheap stuff to the really swanky stuff, which will cost an awful lot of dollars every day to feed your dog. And I think that just straight off the bat, that an average raw food is going to be about the same as an average kibble. Okay, so there are more expensive kibbles, there are more expensive raw options. You get what you pay for, but if you look around, you can find more economic options.
Or make it
Once
yourself, the
Well,
DIY.
that's where I was going. That's exactly where I was going. I think what I always advocate in my video, Raw Feeding Made Simple, I talk to people about, let the professionals do it to start with. Cut your teeth, as it were, with a complete diet and let them do it to start with. And once you feel confident, once you've done your reading, you've read the Forever Dog book by Rodney and Karen, you've read Connor's book, you've had a look at some of our raw pet medics perhaps, and you feel you've got a better understanding of raw food, then you can start creating a diet yourself with meat and bone and organ and some vegetable material and some omega-3s, and you put all that together, and that is more economic.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people are just so afraid of doing it themselves that they're not ready to take that leap.
Yeah, I think to allow, it's like when you first start to drive a car. Yeah, when you first start to drive a car, you've got an instructor, and then when you pass your test, at least I'm not sure how you do it in the States, but then you pass your test, you throw your L plates, L for learner, you throw those away and you start on the road. And it's the same. I think, have a mentor, a guru, or a company who's going to look after you for your first few months, and then you move to tentatively making the diet for yourself. It's interesting, Ruby, that we make food for ourselves without a second thought every single day. And yet, because we've been brainwashed by the food companies over the last, the dog food companies over the last 60 years, that they are the only ones who know how to feed your dog, that we don't feel confident in feeding our dogs. Okay. And it is as let me, it's very interesting that we feel comfortable to feed our children depending on what's in their fridge, what's in the cupboard, and yet with
Sure.
our dog, we have been trained, and that's literally it. We've been trained that unless it comes out of a tin with a dog on it, or with a bag with a dog on it, you're going to kill your dog. It's a really bizarre situation that we find ourselves in, but that's where we find ourselves. And so it's all about education, and that's why I do what I do. That's why Rodney does what he does. That's why Raw Pet Medics are on this journey to educate people.
Right. And I'm afraid though that we will hit something similar when raw food becomes more popular in terms of the same line of thought. You can't do it yourself. If you don't hire a nutritionist or someone to formulate your meals in a spreadsheet, then you're going to do it wrong. So we're still sort of on a path potentially to go down that same road. What are your
Yeah, I
thoughts
think
on formulating
yeah,
meals in a spreadsheet?
it's really big, really big. Ruby, who do you get to formulate your meals for you and your family?
I don't.
There you go. There you go. So that, I think, is the answer to the question. However, when feeding your dog, I think that just initially, because people are so brainwashed, and I was brainwashed, I'm not pointing any fingers, just initially get somebody to guide you. They don't necessarily have to formulate. They might just say, okay, these are the basics. And I think one of the key things that we need to get through to people who are just starting to move away from kibble is that variety is really massively important. Yeah, if you've got your macronutrients balanced and you're feeding sources of micronutrients, then if you give variety as is provided by nature, then the dog will selectively uptake the level of fat, the level of calcium, the level of selenium, the level of all these things that they need, magnesium and boron and what have you. Because what's the difference between a car and a dog? The answer is you need to put a very uniform fuel source into a car, because it's stupid. It just sucks in the fuel, burns it, and goes down the road. Okay. Whereas a dog, on the other hand, is a smart consumer of energy and nutrients. And so you can put in a variety of fuel sources. You can put in a variety of magnesium sources and sodium sources and selenium sources and what have you. And the 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 dog, with this amazing biochemical ingenuity that it has within its body, will be able to say, okay, our levels of calcium are fine today, so we will just downregulate how much calcium we take in. And it will do the same for most of the nutrients there. And so our job as raw feeders is to produce food that provides the basic building blocks, so that they're always available over a 2 to 3 week period. So that is to say, if you're a manufacturer of kibble, you say, right, you feed this same diet for 2 years, for
All the time, forever.
for forever and ever, for a whole life stage, from early adulthood to late adulthood, before you go into a senior. You feed the same thing, and thus we know you're getting possibly this right level of calcium, phosphorus, selenium, what have you. But whereas what we're doing with a raw food diet is we're feeding a variety of foods, so that over 10 days, 2 weeks, the basic building blocks will all be given, not necessarily all on the same day, but the body in its infinite wisdom will say, okay, oh look, we've got plenty of selenium today, let's take some selenium. Oh look, we're a little bit low on magnesium, let's upregulate our magnesium intake. And I think that's really, really exciting, because we can then work with this dynamic, super, super intelligent thing, which is the dog gut, the dog metabolism.
No, I think that people forget, and I like your car analogy, but I've been finding a lot more success relating things to us. Do we eat the same thing every day?
Yep.
Do we feel better when we eat fresh food? All of those things come so naturally.
Yeah.
Moving on to our next point of why not to feed kibble. What's next on your list?
Okay, so going a little bit further with the insulin, we said earlier that high carbohydrate kibbles are broken down to sugars, and sugars increase insulin. When you have high insulin, and especially if you're eating kibble for years and years and years, you're going to have a high insulin level for years and years and years. And too much insulin for too long, we all know, is a bad idea. It's a great way to invite diabetes, the high insulin. What happens in dogs, though, and this is a really interesting observation, is that when you feed a high fat diet, which has low carbohydrates, and when you feed a low fat diet, which has high carbohydrates, you get different phenomena in the blood. Okay, bear with me on this, because this is the opposite of what you think. So imagine, Ruby, we've got two groups of dogs, and one group of dogs is eating a high fat, raw food meal. Okay, high fat raw food, and within a raw food diet, they have zero grain carbohydrates. They may have some veggies in there, and that's really, really good, but there's no grain carbohydrates. Compared with that, you've got so it's a high fat raw. On the other side, you've got a low fat kibble. Now, if we look at the blood triglycerides, this is the blood fats. Which of those two groups, and this is consistent and this happens in people as well, which of those two groups, the high fat raw or the low fat kibble, which have the highest blood fat? Answer: the kibble.
The kibble fed.
The low
Yes.
fat
Yeah.
kibble, they have the highest blood fats. This happens with humans. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of papers which suggest this. On the Raw Pet Medics last week, we talked to Dr. Mark Roberts, who's done these studies in dogs, and he finds that when he feeds the high fat raw food diet, they have a lower base triglycerides, and it rises less when they're fed that high fat diet. But when you're feeding a kibble diet, they have a higher blood triglycerides, and it jumps up. And he thinks that that's one reason why we see more pancreatitis in
Sure.
kibble-fed dogs, because
Yeah,
you've
and
got this
it's a
high
lot
fat.
harder for our dogs to break down any of those carbs and starches. They're
Yeah,
better
yeah,
utilizing the fat as their source of
that's
energy.
yeah. But it's your dog has more fat in their bloodstream, which therefore needs to be put away as storage, and insults your pancreas when you're feeding low fat or even just regular kibble. So
Sure.
that's amazing, because that's the opposite of what you would think. And most vets who I talk to, and even if I speak to doctors, that's not something that they're aware of, and it's really something to look at, because it's a profound change, and it explains an awful lot.
Has that been reversible in your experience?
Yeah, Dr. Mark Roberts, he talks about this, that you can take a kibble dog with high blood triglycerides, you put them onto a low carb, regular raw food diet, and you will get an improvement in their blood fat, their blood triglycerides.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Amazing.
very cool. Yeah.
What's your thought on mixing raw and kibble together when people aren't ready to make that switch?
Oh,
What are we getting out of that?
wow. Ruby, great question. Okay, this is kind of one of those, it divides the kibble world and divides the raw world alike. And the purists will say, you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't do it. And my answer, I'm kind of sitting on the fence a little bit. And my answer to that is, you can do it, but I would suggest that you have the kibble and the raw fed at different meal times. And
Okay.
if you can avoid doing it, then do avoid feeding kibble and raw. I think because one of the reasons that people feed kibble and raw is because they can't let go of that umbilical connection to kibble, because they've drunk the Kool-Aid, as you guys would say. They've taken on the message from kibble that it is an indispensable part of a healthy and scientifically formulated diet. They
Sure.
they they haven't embraced the idea that if we feed dogs like they've been fed for 45 million years, they're going to do better. When we get rid of all modern foods and we eat good, whole, fresh foods, humans are healthier. There is not a doctor on the planet who would say that the more processed food you eat, the better you are. It's
Right.
whole, fresh foods with a minimum of pesticides and glyphosate and all those kind of things. That's the way to health. Okay. So I would say, if you're doing both, you're standing, it's a little bit like standing on a boat and standing on the harbor. Sooner or
Mm,
later, you might land in the drink. So I'd say either go back to kibble, find yourself the best kibble that suits you and your dog, or go to raw. Find somebody to guide you to raw and go on that journey fully, because metabolically it's probably a better idea. But you're not going to kill your dog if you do both.
Right, right. I think what it is for a lot of people is that training, the peace of mind of, well, in case I'm doing it wrong, at least I'll just give them a little bit of kibble. But what is the reason for feeding separately?
Why feed separately? Because the stomach acid, when you eat a raw food diet, there tends to be higher in protein, and protein drives the pH of the stomach down. Yeah, pepsin turns into pepsinogen turns into pepsin in the presence of protein. So the more protein you have, and raw food diets tend to be higher in protein, and therefore it's more acidic when you're feeding raw, and that's very good for digesting. That kind of stimulates the enzymes for optimal digestion of the raw food, whereas the optimal digestion of a high carbohydrate kibble is less acid. Okay,
Right.
so if you feed the kibble and the acid and the raw together, it's going to either be too acid for optimal kibble digestion, or the kibble holds the acid back, and so it's not acid enough for optimal raw food digestion. You're making me think here. I have to
It's 9
picture
a.m.
this in my
here.
head. And yeah.
Okay, perfect. I think that was actually one of the questions that I saw here.
Mhm.
So hopefully you all found that helpful. We're about halfway
Mhm.
in. How far are we down your list? Should we jump into the questions, the Q&A?
We are just scraping the surface. As I say, guys, this is a fascinating subject, and I'm going to make the talk, the webinar, the video that I'm going to do as brief as possible. But I don't think I'm going to get it inside 3 hours. But I'll break it into lots of tiny little blocks so it's more digestible. I'm really happy to go into questions now, because in a funny way, we're kind of answering many of the questions of why not to feed kibble. As by answering one, we answer 2 or 3 other reasons why not to feed kibble.
Right, right. Okay, where can people find this webinar that you're going to put together?
The webinar, well, I've done two videos so far. If they go to my website, which is holisticvet.co.uk, holisticvet.co.uk, I'm sure Ruby will be able to put it into the show notes.
Yes.
If you go there, you'll see on the website there are 2 videos that I've done. One is called Raw Feeding, the basics, and that is 10-minute lessons. So it's really digestible. 10-minute lessons. So it's about an hour and a half to take you from 0 to 60 miles an hour with raw feeding. It's great for people who are just starting, and it's great for people who've been doing it for 30 years, who just want to see what the new ideas are like. The other video I've done so far is called Bones and How to Feed Them. Bones are a pretty contentious area, and I've just tried to lay everything out on the table so that people can understand what they are, what they do, and how to feed them. And the third one that I'm doing, that I've got in front of me here, is the Beyond Kibble video, and that should be coming out when I get a second to
Yeah,
put it together. Ruby, it's so busy. People really want to hear about raw food, and I'm so delighted. But it means that these little projects take a bit more time than I thought they would.
sure, sure. But there are also people like me who sit patiently and wait. Unfortunately, we have an audience to share all of that with, so you can expect more and more questions to come through.
Yeah, for sure. It's great. I love it, because I learn when I know what people struggle with. It really helps me with my when I'm composing educational videos, or when we come together with Raw Pet Medics. Somebody will just ask us a question through Patreon or something like this, and we'll go, oh yeah, I never thought of that in really great detail. So let's pull that apart at the next Raw Pet Medics live events. So that's how
Yes.
we do it. I'll tell you a story. When we first started Raw Pet Medics, Connor and Brendan and I, we thought, oh my goodness. And Connor actually said this. He's saying, guys, we're going to run out after about 12 shows. We're going to run out of material. And I'm really scared that we're going to run out of material. But you know what, Ruby? We have not got enough time in the day to get through all the material that we come up with. We come up with 2 or 3 questions every single week, and we have to do just one. So watch this space. There's a lot to chew on, as it were.
Yes, I love that. You were right. In our discussion, we actually were able to answer a lot of the questions, but here's one that I think is very popular. What are your thoughts on the latest craze here in the UK on vegan kibble?
Wow. I don't like it. It's as simple as that. I think I totally respect humans who want to eat vegan, although I would warn them that veganism has been hijacked by the ultra processed food industry to sell plant-based food. I think veganism is fantastic. If you want to, not eat honey and eggs and cheese and what have you, that's great. Eating loads and loads of vegetables, I think that's absolutely fantastic. Go for it. I applaud that. However, the four-legged dog lying in front of your fire there doesn't have that choice, and they, by any metric, teeth, gut, digestion, amylase in the saliva, however you want to look at it, they are a facultative carnivore. That means they're way at the top of omnivory, or they are kind of on the borderline between omnivory, where you can eat some veg, some meat, and carnivory, where your food is mainly animal, is mainly, I'll say, mainly animal based.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't like the idea of vegan or vegetarian food for dogs, because they can't choose and because they're not designed for it. And there are some studies coming out of Lincoln University here in the UK saying that dogs do really well on vegan or vegetarian food, but I just think it's too early to tell, and we need a lot more studies with more dogs, or with longer periods and much greater metrics. What are the metabolomics? There's in Helsinki University, there's a guy called Robin Moore who does this amazing, mind-blowing thing called metabolomics, and he will look at 40 parameters with a raw fed dog, and then 40 parameters with a kibble fed dog, and he would be able to do the same with a
Vegan
vegan fed dog,
diet.
which I think we need to do. We need to go into some really kind of mind bending metabolomics in order to really find out what's happening with these
Sure. That's actually a
vegan
common
dogs.
gripe that I hear from people who
Mm-hmm.
are against switching to a raw diet, which is, where's the science behind it? Where are the studies?
Oh,
The only
okay.
studies are by Hill Science Diet.
Yeah, but but another manufacturer is Mars, and so Mars made Mars bars. So there aren't many nutritionists who would say that a Mars bar is good for you. Okay, but we know that when industry does its own science, it's a little bit like marking your own homework at school.
Sure.
Okay, you're likely to get a better mark if you control the scientists, if you control the laboratory, you're much more likely to get the result that you want. So if for any industry does its own research, you have to be suspicious. Independent research is like Helsinki University, for example, that is much more credible because their paymasters are not the people who want the result. So yes, there needs to be more science. There's 2 really wonderful sources of science at the moment. There are 2 books. There's the Forever Dog by Rodney Habib and Dr. Karen Becker, which is great, very readable, lots of science in there. Get it, it's great. The other one, which is again, very readable and very, very comprehensive, is called Feeding Dogs by Dr. Connor Brady. And Ruby, if you're kind enough, if you could put those refs below
Yes,
here, if you're comfortable with that, then that would be
absolutely.
great. And if you could, next time you speak to Connor, say, Nick is doing such a great job at promoting your book. You really need to put him on commission.
I will. I will let him know.
Good.
Those are
Thank you.
actually two of our favorite references to share with our team. And I think
Okay,
we've
great.
got Karen in here who has been lovely, including links to your videos as well. Perfect.
Oh, Karen, as in the wonderful Karen Becker.
Karen Reed,
Oh,
who,
Karen Reed. Okay,
yes,
she's listening today. Great. Karen Reed is just a superstar. She does an awful lot for raw food. She helps us on Raw Pet Medics. So big hello to you, Karen. Thank you.
yes, thank you. How long does it take to notice changes in the body after switching to completely raw?
Wow. Here's a little story. I was once presented with a beautiful Old English sheepdog. You know, the really shaggy dogs.
Yeah.
Do you have them over there? We call them Dulux dogs over here because there used to be a paint company called Dulux who used this bounding Old English sheepdog on their adverts. So I was presented with this Old English sheepdog, and she had never had a solid stool in her in every day of the 5 years of her life. Okay, never had a solid stool. It would be kind of liquidy, and if you can imagine what that looks like at the back end of a really fluffy dog, that's not a fun place to be for
Mm.
5 years. I spoke to the owner, and she was scared, as everybody is when they go onto raw, and she kind of got it, and she said, okay, Nick, I'm going to go with this. Let's put her on raw. She then rang me when she started. She got got her order through and started on the food, and she rang me 2 days later, and she was in tears, and I thought, oh no, Emma, there's something's happened to Emma, and my heart sank. And she's crying and saying, Emma's had the first solid poo of her entire life. I can't believe it. Okay,
Oh,
so yeah, it's fantastic. So it can be with things that can change quickly, it can be very quick. But I would say if you go raw for 2 weeks, you will likely see improvements in stool. You'll see improvements in teeth. You'll see less gurgling in the gut. You'll see like I say, better stool. You will see, even within 2 weeks, because the oils will get through to the skin really pretty quickly, you will see a new softness to the coat, and you will see a new gleam. Yeah, if you've had a dog on a half decent kibble, they're going to have a half decent coat. You put them onto raw food, and you will see a whole new sheen, glimmer coming through with that coat, and it'll be, wow, that was good. This is the best. Okay,
yeah,
and we see those. I think there are many, 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 many metrics that we can use to measure health, and they all improve. Okay, so I think that anything you look at will improve with most raw fed dogs.
yeah, absolutely. I think something that we see on our end, we do our treats and chews, but we also help people make that transition to a raw diet.
Wow,
Um,
great.
a couple weeks into it, everyone is just amazed at the difference that they
So
notice
good.
in their dogs. But we sometimes are not talking about what to expect a few weeks after, when now you're adding variety into the diet, and
Mhm,
my dog has soft stools, what am I doing
mhm,
wrong? And the conversation is, sometimes we eat things and our stools look and feel differently. And if you're eating the
mhm,
same thing every single day, you probably won't expect that. But there is a period that people go through and think they're doing it wrong because they see
mhm,
those soft stools.
mhm,
And or my dog won't eat raw anymore, which brings me to our next
mhm,
question.
mhm.
How much does lightly cooking the food change the food, because some people think their dogs can't go completely raw.
Sure. If you've got a dog and you've tried different temperatures, different grinds, yeah, some dogs like a real paste, and most dogs like it really chunky. If you tried all those parameters and feeding at different times of day, some dogs don't like to eat in the morning, for example, but you've tried all those things, and you've tried a number of different raw food suppliers, quality raw food suppliers for feeding, supplying completes or DIY. If you tried those and just your dog and raw do not get on, I can live with lightly cooking the food. Lightly cooking will change, but it will actually increase the availability of calories in meat, for example, but it will decrease the vitamin C, for example. So it will change it. So therefore, if you are going to cook the food, you need to cook it as little as possible at as low a temperature as possible. If you can get away with just putting the food into a steamer and you just steam it for a few minutes and then feed, great. Yeah, because if you're in a steamer, you're not going to go above about 120 degrees, and so you're much less likely to get these things called Maillard reactions. This is kind of the browning effect that everybody loves so much on their barbecue, but it produces products like acrylamide and other really carcinogenic elements, some of which we find in cigarette smoke, for example. So low temperature and as little kind of browning effect as possible. What you might find is you just put the mince into a frying pan with some say olive oil, and you do a very low temperature fry in order to just go from kind of a pinky mincy color to a kind of a gray sort of color, which is not very sexy, but let's face it, that's what happens to meat when you cook it. Yeah, mince will go from pink to kind of a gray sort of color, but that's okay. If that's what it takes to get real food into your dog, I'd say great. Let's really go for that. Anything to get you away from ultra processed cans and kibble is got to be a good thing.
Sure. I've seen some people sear their meat, which I think is what you're referring to,
Yeah.
a little bit too high heat, but it brings out the smell, and if that's what attracts your dog to eat it.
Yeah, I think play with it. Play with the lowest temperature and the least searing effect. If you can kind of cook the outside of the mince and leave the inside of each little bit of mince slightly raw, slightly rare, then I think you're in a good place. That would be the ideal. But anything but cans and kibble.
There's a fear of cooking bones. Do you recommend using a bone meal powder, or if it's just lightly cooked or steamed, is that not a concern?
My impression is that if it's lightly cooked for a short period, it's not going to render the bone indigestible. Okay, it's just a low heat, and the digestibility of the bone will be similar to if it was a raw food. So if you bake it for 4 hours, yeah, you're going to produce reinforced concrete. It's the bony particles within the food are going to be totally indigestible, and that's not a great idea. There is a company in the UK who've produced a cookable raw. So what they've done is they've eliminated the bone, and they've just put in highly bioavailable supplements to make up for calcium and phosphorus and magnesium and iron and that you find in the bone. So it's a cookable raw product, which is really useful in these situations where we have to cook. That's another option. I'm not sure if you've got anything like that in the States, Ruby.
Not that I know of. I'm a proponent of the whole food source of any vitamin or mineral that we're trying
Yeah.
to feed. So I always go to that first. But surely there's a lot of innovators here, so someone's doing something like that.
Great. Really, really good.
Let's see. I thought I saw one last question as we are wrapping up here.
Mm, mm. This has been a very, very quick hour. I looked at the clock and it was
I
over here,
know.
5:38. I couldn't believe it. I felt like we'd been on maybe 12 minutes. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
Seriously. It's so cool.
I think we did get them all. So I'll pull up Rodney's very last question, which I think you will find quite entertaining. Where did it go? Here we go.
He's sometimes really naughty with his questions. He'll say, I've got a 20-year-old llama. What should I feed it? That's the kind of thing that he sometimes comes up with. He's a very naughty boy.
He says, here's my question. Dr. Nick, hands down, has the best set of hair of any veterinarian in the whole wide world. My cat's coat is super dull, and I strive to get it to look as fabulous as his hair.
Okay. Rodney, you're a charmer. You really are. Do you want to know a secret?
Yes.
I haven't washed my hair with shampoo for 10 years. I wash it with, serious. Yeah. I wash it with water practically every single day. And I don't use product. I use coconut oil and that's it. But I've also got good genes. My mother was from Galway, so that's where the red hair comes from. And, it's like steel wool. That's where, but that's typical and very lovely comment from Rodney. So thank you, mate. I appreciate that. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
My partner is going to love hearing this because he does something similar with the non-shampoo.
Okay.
I want to ask about that real quick though, because I see a lot of people recommending less washes on their dogs to maintain their coat. Is there some correlation there?
That's really interesting. I'm going to go and grab something. It'll take me about 6 seconds. Okay.
Okay.
Just entertain the troops for 1 second.
I will.
Yeah. Hang on.
I don't, I use shampoo, guys. Don't work. Yes. Turk, that is you.
Okay. So my wife runs a company called Dermadog. Okay.
Okay.
This guy here, she runs this company and I don't wash my hair. Okay. And I say consistently, and even though she produces this really fantastic shampoo, I say to people, the ideal frequency for shampooing a dog is 0. But you know what? Dogs go to dog shows, dogs roll in fox poo and goodness knows what. Mine do. And therefore, if you're going to use a shampoo, then use something which doesn't have any sodium lauryl sulfate, has organic products within it, and is as natural and is least harmful as possible. So if you're going to use something good.
Yeah, you don't want to strip all of those oils from there.
That's right. Yeah. But
all right.
good coat health, good skin health comes from within, not from the brand of shampoo that you use,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're just about out of time. Thank you again so much for joining us today. If somebody wants to reach you for a consult to potentially switch over to raw, how can they find you?
They can find me on my website, which is holisticvet.co.uk. If you go there, you'll find all my contacts. We're on social media. We're on Facebook, Holistic Vet Limited. We're on Instagram, Holistic Vet UK. But you'll find all the deets on the website, holisticvet.co.uk. It's an easy one to remember, holisticvet.co.uk.
Yes, absolutely. And we will catch you live tomorrow with the crew.
Awesome. Yep. We're going to be on, Brendan and Connor. We're going to be doing lumps and bumps and discussing what they are, what they do, how to investigate, what's the significance of them. So it's going to be a goodie, lumps and bumps, because everybody is interested and fearful of lumps and bumps on their dogs. So that's where we're going to go tomorrow. It's 7 p.m. UK time. We're currently in British summertime, and we're on Raw Pet Medics, which is the Facebook Live, RPM. You know, do you say for an engine revs per minute, vroom vroom, RPM? That's
We
where it
do.
comes from. You do. Okay, so
Oh,
that's how you remember it. Vroom
yeah,
vroom. Raw Pet Medics.
perfect. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a good
Great.
rest of
It's
your
great.
week.
Ruby, you're doing great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.